Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Niza Makaalin Anzawi and we'll be discussing what is freedom. So freedom is a choice to live one's life according to their own wishes. They should be able to live where they want, eat what they want, and do what their heart desires. The only condition that implies that it shouldn't construct the freedom of others. So freedom in Tagalog, it's kalayaan. So ito yung isang bagay na hindi mo pwedeng tanggalin sa sarili mo. It's because you have the freedom to speak, freedom to what do you want to do, and freedom is yan yung isang bagay na hindi natin pwedeng basta-bastahin as long as wala tayong naaapakan na isang tao. So since we already familiar what is freedom, so we have some clear understanding of meaning of freedom. Even though it may be limited understanding, we cannot embark upon the theoretical examination of practical reasons moral authority. We have already seen the moral law and the concept of the duty presuppose human freedom of choice. If man be simply the unwaiting pawn in cosmic game of causal determination, that is, if all his choice are necessarily determined by his desires, and thus all his imperatives hypothetical, then moral law and moral characteristics fictitious and cannot be possibly related to any reality. On the other hand, if the rational or human will is free, then morality is a genuine practical law. Consequently, in order to determine whether morality is a valid law for the human will, we must as first step prove that freedom itself is a valid concept. Morality imposes a valid constraint on the will of rational being only if the will imposes this constraint upon itself. To say that the will imposes constraint upon itself is to say that a person freely on his own determines his duty and chooses to do it. Choosing and performing one's duty is an example of what we will ordinarily call a free action. However, there are two philosophical views which deny the existence of any such free action. So there are two philosophical views which deny the existence of any such free action. They are determinism and libertarianism. So determinism can be defined as the thesis which holds the human action can only depend on causality. So determinism entails that in a situation in which a person makes a certain decisions or performs a certain action, it is impossible that he or she could have made any other decisions or performed any other action. On the other hand, it is never true that people could have decided or acted otherwise than they actually did. So in libertarianism can be defined as a theory which holds that at least some human action have no causality. So is a political stance generally known as about the idea of individual liberties, responsibility, self-ownership, and free choice. It says the government should have less control over the lives of its citizens and should let them responsible for themselves with the involvement of the good governments. That is libertarianism. The concept of freedom is the key which explains the autonomy of will. If a living being is rational, then he has will which makes him kind of cause, and if such a will is free, then he can exercise his causal power without being determined to his choice by casual influence outside the will itself. Opposed to freedom is natural necessity, which is the exercise of choice under determining influence of outside causes.
Okay, so good morning to each and everyone, and I'm Saina Kapsaran, the second reporter of Group 5. So freedom as presupposition. So the statement, the will of every rational being is free, is a fundamental principle in the philosophical debate on morality. It asserts that morality derived from the concept of freedom can only be valid as law for rational beings. So this statement, which is nanggaling kay Immanuel Kant, that the will of every rational being is free, is in moral philosophy, the concept of freedom is central because it underpins the idea of moral responsibility. Morality involves making choices and acting according to principles or values. And the notion of freedom is essential for individuals to be held accountable for their action. Without freedom, moral responsibility becomes meaningless because individual would not have the capacity to choose between different courses of action. The principle in the statement assert that every rational being possesses a will that is inherently free. In other words, rational beings have the capacity to make autonomous choices based on reason, independent of external influences or determinants. This freedom of the will is seen as a prerequisite for moral agency. Validity of morality for rational beings is the principle further posits that morality, which is derived from the concept of freedom, can only be valid as law for rational beings. This means that moral principle or ethical laws apply to rational beings precisely because they possess the capacity for free will. Rational beings are capable of understanding moral principle, deliberating about their action, and making choices based on moral consideration. Therefore, Kant says that moral laws can guide and constrain the action of rational beings in a way that they cannot be for being lacking rational. Kant argues that for morality to apply universally to rational beings, it must be grounded in the concept of freedom. Morality being a system of laws can only bind rational beings if they possess freedom. Therefore, Kant seeks to establish the freedom of the will as a presupposition for moral law. Kant also emphasized the need for an a priori proof of freedom, which cannot be derived from empirical experience but must be established through reason alone. He rejects the idea that subjective experiences of freedom can suffice as proof, as this will not provide the necessary universality required for moral law. Kant's argument revolves around the idea that freedom of the will is a necessary presupposition for morality, grounded in the practical reason and rational beings. While his proof may not meet expectation for purely theoretical demonstration, Kant maintains that the subjective consciousness of freedom is sufficient to justify moral responsibility and universality of moral law. Kant argues that in order to establish the validity of morality, we must assume that the will of every rational being is free. Proving the existence of freedom is challenging as it cannot be derived from empirical experiences. We must assume that the will of every rational being is free. Kant says that for morality to have validity, we must operate under the assumption that every rational being possesses a free will. This assumption is foundational to Kant's moral philosophy because it underpins the idea of moral responsibility. If individuals do not have the freedom to choose their action, then holding them morally accountable for those actions becomes problematic. Therefore, assuming the freedom of the will is necessary for the concept of morality to make sense. This assumption raises significant philosophical question about the nature of freedom and its relationship to moral agency. Critics may argue that assuming the freedom of the will is arbitrary or unwarranted, as it cannot be empirically proven. However, proponents of Kant's positions may argue that while freedom cannot be proven empirically, it is a necessary postulate for moral reasoning to be coherent and meaningful. Second is proving the existence of freedom is challenging as it cannot be derived from empirical experiences. Kant acknowledges the difficulty of proving the existence of freedom because it is not something that can be observed or measured empirically. Unlike physical phenomena, Freedom is a concept that lies beyond the realm of sensory experiences. This poses a challenge for establishing its existence through empirical means, as empirical methods are limited to studying observable phenomena. Kant's recognition of the limitation of empirical evidence in proving freedom highlights the philosophical tension between empirical and rational modes of inquiry. While empirical evidence provides valuable insight into the natural world, it may fall short when it comes to understanding concepts like freedom, which are inherently non-empirical. Kant's acknowledgement of this challenge underscores the importance of philosophical reasoning and reflection in grappling with fundamental questions about human nature and morality. The subjective consciousness of freedom is necessarily the agent's way of viewing himself when he chooses to act. Kant asserts that when individuals make choices and act, they do so with a subjective consciousness of freedom. This means that individuals perceive themselves as free agents capable of making autonomous decisions. This subjective awareness of freedom is inherent to human agency and plays a crucial role in moral decision making. Kant's emphasis on the subjective consciousness of freedom highlights the phenomenological aspect of human experiences. It suggests that our sense of freedom is intimately tied to our self-perception and the way we understand ourselves as agents in this world. This subjective experience of freedom shapes our moral deliberation and informs our sense of moral responsibility. However, critics may argue that subjective experiences can be influenced by various factors, such as cultural upbringing or psychological biases, raising questions about the objectivity of freedom. Kant proof of the necessity of freedom in action is framed as a deductive argument, with two premises leading to a conclusion. It's structured logically, where the conclusion logically follows from the premises. This argumentative structure helps to make Kant's reasoning explicit and accessible. The proof, however, might be initially disappointing to some because it relies on a subjective experience rather than providing a theoretical, metaphysical proof. Kant emphasized on practical reason and the experience of acting as free agent shift the focus away from speculative reasoning towards life experiences. Kant clarifies two essential aspects of the proof. Since the conclusion is synthetic, not contained within the premises, at least one of the premises must also be synthetic. This highlights that Kant's argument is not purely analytical but involves synthetic preposition derived from practical reasoning. Kant also distinguishes his proof from speculative metaphysics, emphasizing that it's grounded in practical reason rather than theoretical speculation. This aligns with Kant's broader philosophical project, particularly his critique of pure reason, which critiques the limits of speculative metaphysics and understanding the concept like freedom. The first premise that Kant asserts that any being which necessarily acts in the subjective awareness of freedom is subject to the moral law. Kant's first premises asserts that any being with a subject awareness of freedom is in a practical sense a free agent. This premise underscores the connection between subjective consciousness and moral responsibility. It highlights that regardless of whether freedom can be proven metaphysically, acting with a sense of freedom subjects one to moral obligation. The second premise is every rational being possessing a will is aware of freedom, is conscious of acting as a free agent. This argues that every rational being with the will is aware of freedom and acts as a free agent. Kant emphasized the rational being understanding of itself as the author of its action. Kant acknowledges the challenge of providing the validity of belief in free agency. He highlights the importance of establishing a priori the validity of awareness of freedom and action for morality to stand. This underscores the significance of subjective consciousness of freedom in moral reasoning and ethical deliberation. Kant arguments presents a nuanced perspective on freedom, morality, and rational agency. It navigates between theoretical consideration and practical experiences, emphasizing the importance of subjective consciousness and moral decision-making. This approach enriches our understanding of the complex interplay between reason, freedom, and moral responsibility in Kantian philosophy. In conclusion, the proof is not a theoretical one but relies on the experience of acting as free agents.
So hello everyone. By the way, I'm Siti Naharadi Pangaypat. So let us continue our topic for today. So the question is, why should I be moral? So or else I say, why one should be moral is a fundamental inquiry that has sparked various theories and ourselves. So, the moral is essential for achieving happiness. Even it's not a sufficient condition, however, it's crucial to understand why we should detach ourselves from certain interests and how moral law places us under obligation. So, according to philosophers Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, morality is essential for societal order and stability. By adhering to moral principles, individuals contribute to well-being of society as a whole. So, being a moral is a result following universal moral law. Our moral law, irrespective of consequence, and it is emphasized moral duty and the importance of acting out of a sense of obligation.
Bismillah. The dual point of view. Kant's argument argues that human experience of conscious awareness of freedom is sufficient to establish the validity of moral law. He aims to prove that human free will is not logically impossible, that our conscious awareness of acting as free agents is sufficient justification for being truly free, and that the moral maxim of the absolute good will must be self-imposed, self-grounded law of autonomy. Okay. Ang argumento ni Kant ay nagtangkang patunayan na ang karanasan ng tao ng mga malayang kamalayan ay sapat na upang mapatunayan ang katanggap-tanggapan ng moral na batas. Layunin niya ay patunayan na ang malayang kalooban ng tao ay hindi logical, na hindi possible na ang ating kamalayang kumilos bilang mga malayang agents ay sapat na pagsasangguni para maging tunay na malaya, at na ang moral na batas ng lubos na mabuti ay dapat na maging sariling ipinanataw na sariling batayang batas ng autonomiya. Okay. A rational being must think of themselves as a free agent in order to be subject to the moral law. The proof consists of establishing the relationship between rationality and freedom and showing that a rational being necessarily acts in the subjective awareness of freedom. The concept of the dual point of view allows a rational being to view themselves as a member of both the world of sense, impressions, and the world of pure thought. Okay? Ang isang makatwirang nilalang ay dapat mag-isip sa kanilang sarili bilang isang malayang agents upang maging subject sa moral na batas. Ang patunay na ay binubuo ng pagtatag ng relasyon sa pagitan ng katalinuhan at kalayan at pagpapakita na isang makatwirang nilalang ay kinakailangan kumilos sa subjektibong kamalayan ng kalayaan. Ang konsepto ng dual na ay pananaw na nagbibigay daan sa isang makatwirang nilalang na tingnan ang kanilang sarili bilang isang kasapi ng mundo ng mga impression na sa pandama at mundo ng purong pag-isip. Ang huling hakbang ay ang patunay na lahat ng mga tugang nilalang ay ginakailang kumilos sa subjektibong kamalayan ng malayang agents. Patunayan na ito ay mahalaga sa pagtatag ng katanggap-tanggap at autoridad ng moral na batas. Okay. The final step is to justify the proposition that all rational beings with all necessarily acts in the subjective awareness of themselves as free agents. This proof as crucial in establishing the validity and authority of the moral law. Ang patunay na ito ay panghalaga sa pagpatibay ng katanggap-tanggap at autoridad ng moral na batas. Ito ay nagpapakita na ang kamalayang-malayang kumilos bilang malayang agents ay sapat na pagsasangguni para sa patunayan ang katanggap-tanggapan ng moral na batas. So that's all for my report.
So, Assalamualaikum, a pleasant afternoon to each one of you. Today, I want to discuss the freedom of will as a fundamental condition of morality. So, in the realm of moral philosophy, the concept of freedom of will plays a pivotal role as a fundamental conditions from the morality. It grants individuals the capacity to make choices independently of natural causalities laws. So, reflecting their autonomy and agency, however, it is essential to clarify that the freedom does not imply complete detachment from all laws. Rather, it refers to the ability of the rational being to make decisions in accordance with the laws of freedom. This law is articulated in the categorical imperative by practical reasons guide individuals in making choices that are moral, sound, and ethical justifiable. So, the validity of moral law hinges on the existence of freedom, underscoring the need to establish the notions that the will is needed free and subject to the law of autonomy. By adhering to the principle of autonomy, individuals can act the manner that upholds moral standards and respect the inherent dignity of all individuals. So, one illustrative example of this interplay between freedom of will and morality is the concept of ethical decisions making in a professional setting when faced with ethical dilemmas. So, individuals with a strong sense of autonomy and a free will are better equipped to navigate complex situations and make choices that align with ethical principles who value sufficient autonomy and confidentiality. May face dilemmas regarding disclosing sensitive information by exercising their free will in accordance with the morals laws. They can make a decision that upholds the principles of beneficence and non-maleficence. So while respecting the autonomy of the patient. So in conclusion, the relationship between a freedom of will and morality is intricate and profound, highlighting the importance of autonomy in ethical decisions making by recognizing the significance of free free will, moral agency, and embracing the principles of autonomy, individuals can uphold ethical standards and contribute to a more just and compassionate society. So, another example of how freedom will enables individuals to make choices independently of natural causalities laws. So is the act of forgiveness. So is a act of forgiveness when someone chooses to forgive another person, they are exercising their free will to let go of resentment and anger despite the natural inclinations to hold on to navigation emotions in the response to harm or wrongdoing. This decision to forgive is not determined by external factor or causal laws, but is conscious choices made by individual based on their values, beliefs, and capacities for empathy and understanding. So, and forgive someone, individuals demonstrate their ability to transcend the constraints of natural causality and act in coordinates with their own moral compass and sense of justice. So this act of forgiveness reflect the autonomy and agency of individuals, highlighting the profound impact of free will in shaping moral decisions and interpersonal relationship. So that that's one example of we need to very important to us to have a moral forgiveness or uh, freedom of will. So that's all. Thank you and assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.